If you're like me and you enjoy the game Flesh and Blood, it's been over 10 sets since you've been able to purchase pre-constructed, classic constructed decks. What was once thought to be a possible splash in the pan with the original 4 heroes from Welcome to Wraith has now been revitalized in the new announcement from Gamma. So let's dive right in and talk about how this is going to be one of the coolest additions to hit Flesh and Blood in a really long time. With certainly no ado, the number one most requested product from stores and players is most certainly hands down the out-of-box, ready-to-play classic constructed decks, which would be the premier format that most Flesh and Blood players typically go in when they're playing at major events. Now, this is in stark contrast to the unofficial route, which is taking a blitz deck, such as ones that you would find in Heavy Hitters, that I did a video where you can fuse those two CC-ish decks, where you take the two blitz decks, fuse them together, and make a pseudo-CC deck. Now, Flesh and Blood has done a lot to bolster the ability of blitz decks to basically work with the availability in most releases. Now, with the interesting most exception of Bright Lights, where they did the crack, shuffle, and play, there's been a very large gap in the classic constructed options available to players, namely since they haven't come out since WTR. Now, Legend Studios says no more with the special announcement that happened in Louisville, Kentucky at the convention called Gamma. We're going to take a quick side note here and talk about Gamma and some background information just to fill you in on why that's important. The Game Manufacturers Association, or Gamma for short, is a non-profit trade organization dedicated to serving the hobby trade industry. Now, while you may have not heard of Gamma, you may have heard of other conventions such as Origins or Gen Con. Gamma is an event specifically targeting store owners that gives them a chance to talk to these manufacturers about upcoming things for sale. And that's a different approach that would typically be able to be handled at public events like Gen Con or Origins, to name a few. Why that is important is, looking at this from the side of Gamma, the classic constructed box are designed to be competitive at an armory level. The events will contain a mix of new and reprinted cards, as well as some of the most controversial components, and that means that at this point, that's in the little slide here, and that's saying that they are exclusive to active gym stores. But I don't see that as a problem, but we'll come back to that in just a bit. They do go on to say that these will be in limited quantities and tightly allocated with a target MSRP of $39.99, with the cutest small little subtext saying that they will arrive sometime in Q2 of 2024, subject to change. Now, that basically means that probably they have slated it for 2024, but we all know that manufacturing, shipping, logistics, everything can take a toll. Take it with a grain of salt, but I hope to see it in early Q2. Now, if you take that suggested MSRP and you divide that by the quantity of cards that would typically can be in the deck, I would assume at least the 80 because that is the rules for Classic Constructed, that means it's an average of 50 cents a card, plus or minus. Obviously, you would get some cards that have a higher value per card, maybe some inclusions that would give you a better bang for buck, maybe certain types of equipment, or possibly a legendary or two, but I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath. I am still very hyped about this. Now, with that, I believe that the great lesson learned over the release of prior Blitz decks throughout the course of Flesh and Blood's history shows that the success of the Heavy Hitters decks indicates that they've seen a need to push both unique cards as well as extended arts. Now, for me, I've noticed that when you put a full playset in, as they did in the Heavy Hitters decks, it makes it to where a player doesn't need to purchase 2 or 3 copies of these decks so that they don't have to have another, say, Dory vs. Rhinar classic battles constructed where you need to get specific cards that are needed for a deck. Glistening Steelblade? Given that the direction of Flesh and Blood has now been that there will be 3 sets this year, there was another slide that had indicated that there will be a total of 11 releases throughout the year. And one can surmise that between the 3 releases, possibly another LSS branded round-the-table type product, the rest could be classic constructed decks or some surprise things like maybe an Elite Trainer box. But that's just, wishful thinking. Classic constructed decks, there may be some interesting releases that bring back some old heroes that may have since cycled out. A hit Living Legend, because that's how the system works. It's not a type rotation. You might have forgot about that. I haven't. I like the system. Now, if you read between the lines, and well, let's honestly say anything that's said on Twitter, you might have to read a little closer than people say. We've kind of come to the general conclusion that this opens the avenue for LSS to release a slew of heroes that may have otherwise not been originally slated for the core sets, because as we know, those supplemental sets have since been superseded by the expansion slot. As an example, one of the major ideas is possibly an Ira deck, where Ira was the de facto first introduced hero when you first came into the game Flesh and Blood. Now, Ira has already evolved from the handout Let's Learn to Play deck to the TCC LSS version of a Blitz deck. The next logical step would be for that to show up in, say, a classic constructed deck. But since it's never been officially offered, this really could actually fold really well into Part the Mistveil, which is premiering in Japan. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how this all shakes out. In my recent video that probably has not been released as of this point, me reviewing the Star Wars Unlimited starter, we can hope that LSS does something similar where they include some nice tokens, maybe a dice, even a playmat, even if it's paper, which would be something that I know sounds trivial, but at first when you start thinking about how to bring players into the game, and a person really wants to have that ability to have it in a box, and don't want to have to pull out their phone in order to listen to a video, it basically is a useful ability. And that also means that it could help the game grow in other areas where technology is not necessarily first and foremost. Not everyone has a phone in their pocket. Whether or not we see a full deck of commons or rares, which could be the case, hopefully we'll get a great mix of Majestics thrown in. I would like to even make the assumption that these decks obviously are going to be not tier 1 knock the socks off of somebody, but not world competition level, maybe just enough bang for the buck that they bring a solid, good to go to, and maybe be able to modify to your heart's content. The desire would be that these could even be set up to where there is a great and easy way to buy staples from one source without having to go to TCG Player and buying from 3 or 4 different vendors, and things like your staple cards like Sink Belows, Movables, so on, Fate Foreseens, etc., etc. And that would then be a great bundle for a new player to buy. I, for one, am not actually terribly worried with how they'll approach this idea, putting specific cards in, such as ones that are unique to the deck. I mean, the game itself, such as Star Wars, has limited cards that are included in the starters that are only included in the starters. I mean, looking at Magic the Gathering's history, Commander decks have done this, as well as other games that I'm not as familiar with. There are always going to be games, and it is probably healthy for the ecosystem to have cards that are only available in certain products. It not only helps the LGS sell products, but at the same time gives a little bit of variety and also kind of lets you experience some different aspects of the games that you may have not done before. While all these could be taken advantage of, I would hope that most people aren't going to be doing that. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if you think about it, the product is honestly not meant probably targeted for the US market, which we have access to quite a bit of stuff. It is reminding me a lot of the History Pack, which is a great example to get into new markets where the product was not very fully dispersed, and it worked really well for those players to bolster overall ability for card access as well as player count. I'm super excited to see where these land, and honestly I feel like picking one up and reviewing it. At the same time, I'm going to look at maybe what that indicates for the direction on how LSS is thinking about how new player onboarding is going to be, because these products will definitely be one of the, if not first products, that will have somebody show up in the journey of Flesh and Blood. So I'm excited because going from Blitz decks and 2-player intro starters. So to wrap this up, I definitely think that there is some value that will be in these decks, and obviously that will be determined, or at least for the most part looked at from a different financial aspect. But people like myself will look at it, is it something fun to play with the people around me? I don't mind having to think twice about it, so it's not tuned to a certain level. I look at it as something comparable to Magic the Gathering when you're trying to gauge what level your deck is and then asking everyone at the same table and their friends in the same pod, hey, let's all play at this level. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know what that term is. Editing Jake here. A quick video search told me that it was a tool to calculate a score based on the cards in your deck. I had no idea that this existed, and it's actually kind of insane to think about as you go down to a certain card level that you can get some value, but it appears that scale is from 0 to 10, and 10 being the top tier deck, and 0 being basically a random pile of cards, 10 being balls out, it's going to blow your face off. So I'm hoping that these decks are somewhere in that mid 5 to 8 scale tier if you're using that same Commander scale. Well, I certainly hope that this information found you well, and I hope that this coming a little after a bit of a pause in my video editing to say that I have managed to get a bit more progress on the little project of mine that I've been working on, so I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what that is. Here, I'm currently in development of an Arsenal camera as well as a hand cam that can be leveraged for players and streamers to get a clear image of streaming. That typically are two areas in which I see folks kind of have the most issues with because they can't see cards clear enough. Now, while these two solutions at the moment are still super technical and not really polished, meaning that I hope to put a nice wrapped bow on top of it and make it easier for players to be, as well as trying to keep it financially within the means for most people to be able to grab, and a little bit less forgiving on the technical aspect, because there are currently a lot of IP config type stuff and code-based things and configuring cameras to get access to Wi-Fi, and it's a hot mess. So working on getting all that. Anyways, I have a couple of videos in the works right now. I did a few interviews with a local folk about an RTN Arachne deck, and I hope that that will come out. Now that the RTN is coming up to be over with, we can do a follow-up and combine those two videos to talk about how the before and after worked. So stay tuned for that coming up shortly, as well as the aforementioned Star Wars Unlimited stuff that I filmed. And for later, when the wife happens to see this online, happy belated birthday. Love you very much. So until next time, may your games be fun and your friendships grow. Cheers. Now it's time to go to the bar and have a blast with everybody we know, because karaoke is something, and I don't participate in that particularly, but everyone else is going to have fun. So see you on the flip side. You're captain. You're captain. I lost my screen. Did my phone die? My phone be dead? Did my phone be dead? Bro, my phone died. My phone. First world problems. My phone is dead in the middle of my recording. Son of a gun. All right. Well, did not expect that to be in the middle of this. I'm going to have to ad-lib the second part or wait 30 minutes for it to charge. This'll be in the outro takes, because that's what happens. God, technology sucks. I gotta wait for the teleprompter to catch up, so I'm gonna finish my Pokemon battle here. Hypnosis? Why am I asleep? Bro. Oh, I ran into a trainer battle. I was hoping to just hit save, but apparently I can't. Can you even see what I'm battling? Correct. Now, can I beat the youngster in the time it takes for my teleprompter to scroll down after the stuff I've already read to where I need to go? That I don't know. Tackle. Quick attack. No. My Magikarp knows tackle because I'm trying to make a Gyarados.